welcome back to another video. Today we're in Plymouth, and the reason we're in Plymouth is because we've come to this place here, which is Heyl Bakery. Now, Heyl Bakery is a vegan sourdough bakery. Been meaning to come here to do basically like a crash course on making sourdough, because sourdough is like one of those things that I just have been avoiding because I always thought it's pretty difficult. I've never been able to get it right. But while I'm here, I want to learn as much as I can about making sourdough, and then hopefully get some sourdough starter from them and then take it back to London, where at home I'm going to attempt to make my own sourdough.
This is Kate and Sam. They're my cousins and they run Heyl Bakery. Sam mostly does all the sourdough bread while Kate is in charge of the pastry side of things. Before we get into the baking, however, we need to go over the most important ingredient in bread, and that's the flour.
So all of this is from England?
Yes, yeah, it is. So like these ones that we kind of use the most are from the local mill, so 25 minutes up the road. So that's the variety. Yeah, so that's what we're using in our leaven today, and whole grain. I actually get him to mill it in a special way so that we get almost like the white flour, and then we've got these super nice chunky bits of bran. So we know the varieties, single variety, we know where it's the farm it was grown. We know it's from the 22 harvest, so like we have kind of full traceability on the flour. It's a population wheat, so it's a mixture of all different genetic strains in the field.
So it's
but
not
of
just
older
one,
wheats.
It's not just one grain.
The grain as a whole is, yeah, a genetically diverse mix. And through kind of successive breeding seasons, it kind of adapts to its location. This is the white, so we've got a few different whites that we use. Again, this is from the local mill, another variety. So that's kind of the main flour in our doughs at the moment. This one's a Malika, which is a fairly modern wheat, nice and strong, so it kind of gives body to our loaves in conjunction with the big flavor from the wholemeal. And then this is another stone ground white flour from a slightly bigger mill. You can see actually that this one, it's brown, white, but it's got, yeah. So I typically blend 2 or 3 flours to get the result that I'm after at any one time.
And these all have different, is it protein levels there?
Yeah, but they're actually, we typically, so a high gluten white flour, like from a supermarket, or from Canada or Kazakhstan or Ukraine, you're sort of looking at 13, maybe up to 15, maybe even beyond protein content. We're typically working at in the kind of 9 to 12% protein range. Just British growing conditions, basically. Yeah. British growing conditions, these older varieties, so taller straw wheats. So a lot of these flours were relegated to biscuit making or cake making and things like that, and then people have kind of, there's a movement to bring them back, yeah.
After getting a quick rundown on the flour used here in the bakery, it was time for us to get into the bread making, and luckily Sam had prepared some dough beforehand, so we didn't need to wait hours for proofing. He even had some ready to throw in the oven straight away, so that it would be ready to try at the end of our baking session.
So we shaped these at like 5 o'clock. They've been in the fridge for about 19 hours now. They went in maybe 75–80% proved. They've been at around 4 degrees overnight, and we can see that they've risen a little bit more overnight, which is great. And when we touch it, it just springs back slowly. If it was sinking to the touch, then you're probably overproofed. If it was springing back super quick, then it's probably underproofed.
So I see a lot of people put them in like plastic bags when they do this. Do you not bother with that? Because I know it's like it's kind of formed like a skin.
Yeah, there's a very slight skin. That's not too much to worry about. Maybe if the whole, if you're super crusty on the top and that crust is kind of cracking, maybe it would be good to just chuck a towel over it in the fridge or something like that. But yeah, so no need to kind of put it in a plastic bag or whatever.
So that's perfectly proof then?
Yeah.
And then at this point, this is ready to just start baking?
Yeah, exactly. Maybe if depending how cold your fridge is at home, it's unlikely that it's going to be too cold. We're in and out of our fridges at home all the time. You might want to get it out and just leave it for 10 minutes just to come up to temperature.
So you do want it to come back up to room temp?
Just slightly, a little bit. But yeah, we're going to bake straight from the fridge today because these are good to go.
Okay.
So it's just kind of like, even at this late stage, just paying attention to how it is. So we're going to bake these in the deck oven, which is up to temperature with the steam injection. So we've got wooden boards and these reusable silicons just to help us slide them in rather than having to chuck big amounts of flour and semolina around. So I'm going to put a little bit of flour on the top just to prevent them burning on the bottom
Yep.
more than anything. Just like a little extra layer.
And this is that stone ground whole.
Yeah,
And-
I tend to chuck whatever flour I'm trying to get rid of in my dusting
Okay,
flour,
yeah.
but generally it's white flour with a bit of wholemeal rye or some bran.
And is that the same? That the dough is made from the same.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, it's made from a blend of the same flours.
Perfect.
So what we're going to do is we're going to tip it out and then score the top lightly, which will just help it bloom in the oven in the way that we want it to, rather than if we didn't score it, it would kind of burst out in all kind of weird ways, or just be very restricted. So we can use a lamb, which is just basically something to hold your razor blade.
And these are just the safety razors you get. From
Yeah,
like,
these are just safety razors. I just get them
like really
you know,
cheap
big
online.
box off Amazon. In practice, I actually just prefer holding the
Just
razor.
holding the razor. Okay, we're just gonna tip it out, or is there a way to do this, or
Yeah, we're just going to tip out our dough,
we'll do the same thing? Just tip it out.
just dust off any excess flour. Basically, you want a score that's going to help it to grow evenly in a round.
Yeah.
So a square is good, or a triangle, or a cross. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So you see they don't quite meet. So slightly overlap them. Yeah, cool.
Nice. Bit about there.
Yeah,
Like that?
that's about right.
Perfect.
I pressed the wrong button.
Or is that the steam
We
injector?
might have to wait a second, yeah. So to go in the oven. So you go right to the back,
Yeah.
and then it's just a little scooch to get it
Right
all
to the
full.
back,
Yeah,
and then
yeah, that's it. Cool, we're away.
hell yeah. So from what I understand, you want to hold it at the end, which you're going to cut with, right about there, and then use your fingers as a depth guide. So when you run it along, it only goes as deep as the tip of your finger.
Yeah, so you've got a couple of mils depth there. Turn the key and then cut.
Okay.
So if we were doing an oval loaf with one straight score, just straight along like that. So just in a slight angle,
Okay.
because then that controls the direction of the expansion.
Since we had some time while the bread was baking, we moved on to the part of the sourdough that makes sourdough, and that's the sourdough starter. And once again, Sam had prepared some levain for us as well.
They
The
look-
only difference between starter and leaven, the terms, starter is what you're going to maintain. That's what you're going to keep over time. You're going to perpetuate it by feeding it regularly.
Yeah.
A leaven is a quantity of ferment that you use to build your dough, and then it's
Okay,
done, and then
okay.
it's gone.
So the leaven goes in the dough,
Yeah.
but the starter is
So the starter is your
the
kind
one
of
that you keep.
ferment. That,
Okay,
yeah,
and
you
which
keep
one's
forever
which
and ever.
on this one?
So we keep a rye starter. So it's made with whole grain rye, which has this lovely grey kind of blue steel color.
And how long have you had this one?
I made that in 2019.
2018. That's 4 years old.
So it's called Little Wayne after the guy that told me how to make sourdough. When I feed it, I always keep the previous iteration in a separate container
Yeah.
as the backup for a while. So there's
Okay.
always one backup in the bakery, but then we also have some that we spread it out on parchment paper, dry it overnight, crumble it, and then we freeze it. There's 1.5 times the amount of flour in water
1.5
weight.
times. So
Yeah.
that would be. You said there's 200 total.
200 total, yeah, something like that. So hang on.
So 50 gram, 150 grams. Wait, 1.5 times. So 150 grams of water, 150 grams of flour, right?
Yeah,
That adds up, right?
let me. My typical feed is for an overnight starter is 10 starter. This is grams. And I'll do 90 water and 60 of flour. So that's just for keeping a small amount.
I probably won't be making bread sourdough as often as you are.
Yeah.
And I've tried to store starter before and it just separates out.
Yeah.
And is that okay or is that?
It's okay. So another thing that people worry about way too much is what you hear is my starter has died.
Yeah.
And it hasn't died. Like, they're super resilient. If you've left it in the fridge too long, separate it out.
Yeah.
You've got that vinegary layer of
Uh-huh.
acetic acid on the top. Just feed it multiple times in quick succession.
Uh-huh.
This starter's fed twice a day in the bakery, once in the morning, once in the evening.
What about freezing? Can you freeze these?
Yeah, so like I say, get a sheet of parchment, spread the starter out really thin on it, pop it on a wire rack, dry it out overnight. Might take a day and a half depending on how humid.
Oh, so you can actually use. Oh,
Yeah,
might
and
do
then you
that.
just crumble it up into like a flour and store it in a sealed container and freeze it.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah.
Sounds easy enough.
Yeah. It's
Okay.
super easy. So this is a ripe starter, so it's kind of peaked. It's like slightly domed at the top. It's super active. And if I just kind of dig in there, we can kind of see
Oh yeah.
what's going on underneath. And the smell is like,
Oh, kind of smells like it kind of smells like a homebrew, like
yeah.
or like
Yeah,
kombucha
yeah.
as well.
Yeah, winey, appley kind of flavors.
Yeah, it smells like apple cider when I make apple cider.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah,
apple
yeah.
cider vinegar.
Different starters will have different characteristics.
You're literally just using your hands. I mean, obviously cleaned a bit,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
washed hands.
Clean your hands, get all the soap off.
And then just using your hands.
So the yeasts initially come from yeasts in the flour, yeast in the air, and yeasts on the person.
Yeah.
That's what kind of determines it. But then in sourdough, what happens when the culture stabilizes is that you've got yeasts that are tolerant to a certain level of acid that the bacteria that they cohabit with
Yeah.
are producing. Vice versa, the acids are tolerant to that level of alcohol that the yeast are producing, but that becomes hostile to any other forms of bacteria, basically.
Okay. Yeah. That kind of sounds the same as when we do lacto fermentation,
Yeah. So you're going to get a balance of lactic acids and acetic acids in there.
and that's what kind of gives sourdough its
Yeah.
sour.
So typically, when we make a loaf, we're trying to produce. We want a starter that's got high yeast production and nice lactic
And
flavors.
is there a way to test that? When
Taste.
Just taste.
Yeah.
Taste. Okay.
Yeah,
Fair enough.
yeah,
Yeah.
So yeah, we're generally looking for like a younger leaven will have more lactic
Yeah.
flavors, more lactic acids, and then as it matures and gets more vinegary, that's
Yeah.
your acetic.
Oh, fair
Coming
enough.
through.
Sounds good.
You make your leaven the night before. This is a whole wheat leaven. So this is a very liquid starter, and this is a stiff whole wheat leaven, which I like for a couple of reasons. The first is that it's quite stable.
Yeah.
The kind of like the peak compared to a liquid leaven is a bit longer. It brings loads of flavor. It allows you to pre-ferment some of your whole wheat in your recipe, which kind of you're soaking that bran, it's softening it down. It's
Yeah.
not going to disrupt the gluten so much. And the final reason that I really like a stiff leaven
Clean.
is clean.
Yeah. I
It's so
imagine-
easy to deal with.
That's probably easier to mix into the main.
Yeah, and I
dough
can
as well,
just
right?
take off chunks and put it in. But this is mature. So we've got a gluten structure
yeah,
in
that
there.
is really good.
It's still got a bit of strength, which is good. That's a good sign. If it's kind of like breaking down in your hands, it's probably because it's overproofed, or if it smells super acetic, you can, when you tap it, you can just about hear that it's kind of sounds hollow. Not so much now, I've played around with it, and you get like a bit of acid in there.
Oh yeah.
Kind
Oh
of-
yeah.
Yeah, like some nice sort of
And how much
cereally.
dough would that make?
This is enough for what did I make? About 2.5 kilos of dough.
2.5 kilos. That's
Yeah.
quite a lot.
Yeah.
And that's more than anyone's going to be making at home.
Yeah. So yeah, for one loaf of bread, you could be looking at like that much.
So like just given enough time to proof or ferment, like proof, yeah, a little bit is enough.
Yeah, sure. I think the recipe we're going to make today, it's about 15% leaven.
Okay.
Actually, if I was at home, so that's based on the recipe we do in the bakery. At home, I would maybe do a formula that's based on sort of 20-25% leaven, because basically you're working with a small amount of dough.
Yeah.
It will get cold faster.
Oh, okay. So
Possibly you're not keeping as a starter as active as the one that we keep in the bakery. So,
and here you've got more control over
Yeah,
temperature and
sure.
everything.
yeah. This 100% will be the flour in the dough. So it won't account for the flour in the starter or the leaven.
Okay, yeah.
But if you think about it, 10% of your flour will go into your leaven.
So you'll measure out this, but then just take off, take away
Yeah.
10% and then use that.
And then 90% of your flour is going in the dough.
Okay.
And then you might have 7% water, salt, 2%, something like that. And then your leaven, once you've built it, might be something like 15%. And that's basically your every sourdough formula ever works off that. Well, so you might be doing a 75% hydration dough. So I've got 70% here. So 5% of my water might be over here.
So that would be 5% of
Yeah.
that.
This is not a very clear representation.
Yeah.
So this is for an overnight ferment. So it's a small amount of starter compared to the total amount of flour.
Yeah.
And because we're working with whole wheat flours as well, they ferment really quickly. So we really do need just a small amount of starter. So we're going to do 8 grams of starter.
Oh, this thing is accurate.
It doesn't do, it only goes up in intervals of 2 though.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, so 8 grams.
8 grams plus the... So this is 60% hydration, this leaven.
Mm-hmm.
So then I've got 96 of water.
So that's all you need for
Yeah.
how many loaves
This is
would that
enough
make?
for 4 800-gram loaves. Excessively large scoop for 166 grams. So just under double the amount of water.
How accurate do you want to be?
You don't need
If
to
you're
be
doing
so
it at
bad.
home.
2 grams is not going to
Yeah.
change anything really. And
And then
then
just hands.
get the old claw in. Just get it really well mixed.
So that is quite dry.
Yeah. So it's like a dough, basically. It's more common to see, like you mentioned yesterday, a white starter that's equal amounts of flour and water.
And that.
But this, I just think you get more flavor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay.
So you can see the difference that the fermentation made to the color, to the structure. This one's got a bit more of a pull from where that gluten's developed.
Mm-hmm.
There's no salt in that. We didn't need it. Whereas this is a bit shreddy at the minute.
Oh, this feels really light. Much lighter than,
Yeah.
that's just like very dense.
Yeah, and I think the color change is really interesting as well. So yeah, you can just put that in a little bowl, ferment it overnight.
That's
Somewhere
ready.
quite warm, wants to be about 20, 22 degrees. Something
Just
like that.
overnight?
Yeah.
Okay.
So with our levain sorted, it's time to move on to making the dough that's going to turn into an actual loaf of bread. Sam here is using an Excel sheet he's made that allows him to plug in any amount of flour, and then using some commands, it spits out the amount of water, salt and levain required for the recipe.
Flour first. So this is the one we looked at earlier, the April bearded flour, variety of wheat. So 56.
So you don't want a lot of whole grain.
This is about 15% whole grain, sorry, closer to 20% whole grain in the recipe. Because a lot of the whole grain flour for the dough is in our leaven.
Oh,
So,
okay, yeah,
This is
true.
just like
Yeah.
the rest of it.
56, right?
Yeah.
5, 6. And then how much
So
of
we
this?
do about 300 of that one.
$2.94. Close enough. $2.99.
Cool. Yep. And then we're going to make it up to 775 with this one, which is the locally milled
From here to
white flour.
775.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Exactly.
6. Almost there.
He's so
We're going a gram at a time here.
775. Perfect.
Nailed it. Right. Let's get rid of these. Next, we're going to weigh out our leaven. So
So the leaven goes in now.
there are different ways to do it. At home, so the first stage of mixing, what we're going to do is we're going to hydrate the flour and kind of just bring the dough together. We're not really going to develop too much of a gluten network at that stage. It's called the autolyze stage, which means self-mixing. So basically, we're going to introduce water and gluten is going to start to form. Enzyme activity is going to kick in. What it's good for, we'll do quite a short autolyze today. And it's good for putting in most of your water, and then you get a feel for how it feels, how much more water it's going to take. If we added all of our water up front, then the risk, you can always add water in, but you can't take it out.
Fair enough.
So we're just going to add in the water, leave it for like 15 minutes, and then we'll add the salt.
Okay.
And then that's when we start organizing that kind of like loose, chaotic gluten network into something a bit more organized. Like
good.
straighten it all out, fold it in the right way, and then it'll start to produce a dough that's both elastic, which is the pull,
Okay, yeah.
and extensible. So that's
So
the
stretchiness.
Stretchy.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. What a long autolyse does is promotes extensibility. So it gets if you've got a really super strong flour, then you can afford a longer autolyse, which will just help it become more
really
stretchy and
stretchy.
elastic. Good for these are like, as I say, softer stone ground flours. So I don't tend to do a longer autolyse. I might do it for something like a baguette where I want to create a long shape.
Okay, yeah.
But yeah, and we're going to do it with the leaven. Traditional autolyse, you leave the leaven out, but for a short one like this, it's not
Leave it in.
going to impact too much.
Okay.
You're not going to get a lot of fermentation happening in 10 minutes, so we
Yeah.
might as well get it mixed in now.
Okay.
And we need 132 grams each.
132.
I'm suddenly doubting that I have that much.
Let's see how much you have.
I've got
Oh,
132
perfect.
there.
Okay, so that's 30, 29.
It should be all of that, to be honest. No?
Plus this. 128. I don't know if that's 10 grams in there.
Okay.
131? Is
We've
that
got
close enough?
130 each.
Okay.
There's 2 grams kicking about in the bowl, I think. But because it's a stiff leaven, I'm just going to disperse it a little
yeah, break
bit
it up a
so
little
it
bit.
doesn't kind of clump in one area of the dough. Help it mix in a little better.
There you go. A bit bigger. I see how big your pieces are. I'm making mine too small.
Cool.
Okay.
So then water. And water is the biggest lever you have to pull to control temperature.
Okay.
So we're in the bakery now. The oven hasn't been on overnight, so it's pretty cold. The flour is probably like 15 degrees temperature. The air is, I don't know, 16, 18 degrees right now, something like that.
Yeah.
At home, you know, hopefully it'll be a bit warmer, but we're going to use quite warm water to get our dough temperature where we want it to be. And controlling dough temperature is kind of the ball game when it comes to ferment.
Yeah.
So we're aiming for a dough temperature of between 24 and 30 degrees.
24
But
to
the
30.
sweet spot for me is between 26 and 28 degrees as a final
Okay.
dough temperature.
Yeah.
So that means after you've mixed everything in.
Yeah.
So in the winter, we always mix, we start off higher and then the temperature drops.
The rest of the flour and everything will bring.
So you want to keep an eye on dough temperature basically throughout the process to ensure that you get the right balance of yeast activity and acid production. The longer your fermentation goes, the more enzyme activity you get. The flour, you know, everything's starting to break down a little bit, so you don't want to end up with something too cold. At that 26, 28, we're going to develop all the flavors that we're looking for in a really nice dough. So yeah, get a digital thermometer. I'm sure you have millions.
I have.
And yeah,
I think everyone should have one of them anyway.
yeah. It's hard to say what temperature water you should be using at home because everyone's environment is different. So the best thing to do is just repeat the same recipe over and over again, and you'll take the temperature and adjust accordingly.
Then would you say like a good temperature if you don't have a thermometer, so like just body temperature? Like
Yeah,
if you're
yeah,
just
about
feel the water.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I've been working in the bakery lately, and we're making a small quantity of dough, and I know that we need water to be around 38 degrees, something like that, because it's going to drop considerably.
Oh, okay.
By the time we've mixed it into this cold flour,
38 won't damage the.
if you've got water over 50 degrees, 55 degrees, if the yeast get above that, that's
when they start dying.
It's called the thermal death point,
Okay.
which is a really cool name for a metal band, right? But yeah, so once you get kind of above that, your yeast are going to start dying. But
Okay, so 38 is safe.
yeah, there's just under 38.
38 degrees? Yep.
Yeah, so that feels really warm because we're so cold in here
Oh,
today.
yeah.
570 grams of that. A couple of grams either way, 5 grams either way isn't going to make too much difference.
Oh, perfect. 570.
Perfect.
Perfect.
All we're looking to do with the first mix is just hydrate that flour, make sure everything's evenly dispersed, our leaven is mixed in, so it'll kind of become a shaggy mess.
Yeah.
So I always keep one clean hand, one hand for mixing.
Okay.
Means you can grab a dough scraper or your thermometer or whatever you need to.
Yep.
So I'm just going to start mixing it in with my fingertips and then start scrunching it together. And then as I go, I'm going to start reaching right under, bringing it up and over itself, get that flour off the bottom of the bowl, pushing it into the side of the bowl, just to get everything
Scrape
off
everything
there.
off.
Yeah. So use your fingertips,
Yeah.
fold it over itself, push down with your knuckles.
So much
And then
dough
just
stuck to my hand.
Use that dough to get the flour off the side of the bowl.
Okay.
So when you use the scraper, you can, if you wet it,
Oh, is it?
stops too much sticking to the scraper.
There you go. Now it's coming together nicely.
So right now this is sitting just under 70% hydration, like 68, something like that. We've held back some of the water to introduce later,
Yeah.
because that'll help dissolve the salt. All your flour's wet.
Yep.
There's nothing else to do at this stage, really. If we look at this now, it just comes apart in my hands. A little bit rough, a little bit shaggy. But we're just going to leave it for about 15 minutes, 20 minutes, and then
15,
we'll
20
add the
minutes?
salt and some more water.
Okay.
We'll get some lids, because we want to keep it covered to make sure it's not dropping in temperature too rapidly.
Yeah.
The thing with sourdough, it takes, from start to finish, it could be a 24-hour process, but the actual contact time, hands-on time
There's
is
not
very
much,
minimal.
not much
Yeah.
kneading.
Especially the way that we're going to do it. We're not going to take it out of the bowl
Yeah.
today until we shape it.
Okay.
It's going to stay in the bowl throughout the mixing process. Right, so the dough's had sort of 15, 20 minutes, and all that's happened really is that flour's hydrated, it's absorbed more of that water. How it's
Going
smoothed
smooth.
out.
And this is stretching a lot. It
Yeah.
just feels much more supple.
So we've definitely already got, this is without any kneading, and we have got, a gluten network
nice.
that's kind of formed. We've got extensibility as well as elasticity, like it's pulling away from me. Next, we're going to add the salt, a little bit more water, and then we're going to build up that water
Okay.
as we mix. So we've got an organic sea salt. It's a fine ground salt. You can use like a flaky salt at home, but just make sure to like grind it up a
Ground
little
up
bit,
nicely,
otherwise
yeah.
it kind of sticks around in the dough. Or you could dilute it in a little bit
In the
of
water.
water.
Yeah.
So we need 16 grams of salt. So remember, this is enough for 2 800-gram loaves. As a very rough rule of thumb, if you're making a kilo of dough,
Yeah.
your salt's probably going to be around 10 grams. Salt is always 2% of flour, so 2 800-gram loaves, so twice 8 grams.
Goes to 16. Okay.
Yeah. The rest of our water to bring up to a 75% hydration dough is 64 grams. We're not going to add all of that at once. We're going to introduce it in stages. So let's start off with like 30 grams of that, and then we'll add
Okay.
the other 34 as we go. Sweet.
Cool.
That little bit of water, we're just building up the water in the dough, but it's also going to help the salt dissolve. So I'm just going to spread that evenly around and then start pressing it in with my fingertips. So salt has a strengthening, like it tightens the dough when you put it in.
Oh wow. I didn't know that.
So then I'm going to go back to starting to fold it in on itself, picking it up from one edge, bring it into the middle, pushing it in with my fingertips, and just rotating the bowl, working my way around the clock. And so we're now organizing those kind of chaotic gluten network in there into something workable. I'm going to add a bit more of that water because it's already
Yours
absorbed.
is coming together a lot faster than mine.
Maybe chuck in another 20 grams and then we'll
20 grams.
keep the rest. So again, now we've added more water. I'm just giving it a quick scrunch in, and then I'll go back to my kind of process. Use your knuckles to press it into the middle, because
Okay,
then that's
press.
going to get that water from the bottom, and it's going to start sticking in. So press in the center of the dough. Nice.
Oh, it's
and you
much
can see
faster,
like,
yeah.
how it's smoothing out.
Oh yeah.
You're
If
actually
it-
getting something that looks like a dough,
And it's not sticking to my hands.
not sticking to your hands because you've got a wet hand. Kneading, you see them, you see them on Bake Off or whatever. They've got it on the table. They're kind of doing all this stuff.
Yeah.
That does work really well for like a slightly lower hydration loaf. This is in the high hydration territory, so we're 75 and above.
Yeah.
My preferred method is to just keep it in the bowl at all times. Work with a wet hand. Add water when you need to. But now we've got all our water incorporated, I tend to just keep it in the bowl. And what I'm going to do is reach in to the far edge with a wet hand, lift it up and stretch it, and then just bring it in to the center. Then
Push it in.
rotate
Yeah.
and repeat. And just push it right in and stretch it out, give it a little wiggle. And this is enough to develop that gluten. The the dough will do most of the work itself. By doing this, we're just kind of helping develop that and organize the gluten in there. So you don't want to like do it so far that it tears.
Yeah.
You just want to bring it up a little bit each time, working it some more. So if it's tearing a little bit, you can just rest it. Leave it to rest for a couple of minutes and then come back to it. Because we've been kneading it, it's definitely got elasticity.
Much more.
As it rests, like it will kind of relax and
Yeah.
extend out a little bit. But that's just from, what, 2-3 minutes of mixing without huge mess. We haven't chucked loads of flour around everywhere.
So now we're starting the bulk fermentation of the dough. We set aside the dough at room temperature, but we still do need to pop back to fold the dough.
So our doughs have had about half an hour to rest. In that time, it's kind of continued to mix itself, as it were. Fermentation should have started. We've got a nice temperature. Our leaven's kind of nice and active. We've got
a little bubble there as well.
Little fermentation bubble in there. We're now into the bulk fermentation process. So the time from when we added the salt to when we're going to shape it or divide it and shape it is going to be roughly 3 hours.
Okay.
Again, that depends on temperature, etc., etc. But during that bulk fermentation, we're going to give it 2, 3, maybe 4 folds. Firstly, it evens out the temperature, so you cold dough from the top goes to the bottom and vice versa.
Yep.
Degasses the dough slightly, so we don't have an excess of carbon dioxide that's been produced by the yeasts. And it also kind of continues to organize that gluten network and strengthens the dough. So when we do it, we will feel the dough kind of strengthen. So I've just got a wet scraper, and I'm just going to release the dough from the edge of the bowl so that it doesn't kind of stick too much. And then with wet hands, I'm going to kind of reach in sort of 2/3 of the way up from myself and pull it upwards. And what this is kind of a variation, what's called a coil fold. So it's going to loop in around itself.
Yeah.
And that's going to kind of stretch it all out. So I'm going to reach in, bring it up, give it a little stretch as I go. And it's going to pull off the side of the bowl and flick underneath itself.
Oh, okay.
And I might do that once or twice in one direction. Turn the bowl in the other direction. And I'm just using my fingertips to kind of release the dough. And you see how it's smoothing out?
And then 90 degrees.
90 degrees again, 180. And then just to neaten it out. So we've got like a really nice, smooth packet of dough.
So like before and after.
Yeah. Your first fold, you can be quite rough with it. You can be quite, you can pull it and degas it a little bit. But as you go through, you want to kind of keep some of that gas in. So you want to be gentle.
Would you still do it as many times, fold it as many times for the...
I might just go 1, 2, 3, 4.
Okay, so not as many times.
Later in the... So we would do 3 folds. We'll do 1 after half an hour, and then 30 minutes after that, 30 minutes after that. And then for that last hour of bulk fermentation, we'll leave it alone to rise.
Okay.
Yeah, just work your way around.
Yeah, you definitely need to get your hands really wet.
It's good, it's good. And then this is probably your last one. Awesome.
These are ready to go sit down again for another
we'll leave them
half hour.
30 minutes and
then do the same.
And then do the same again.
Cool.
So the bulk fermentation for this was 3 hours it was in the end. So which is what I was targeting. So I kind of aimed to bulk ferment for a minimum of 2.5 hours, a maximum of around 4 hours. There's a few tests you can do. One is just the feel of it. So it's got a bit of a pull. It's airy and gassy.
Oh yeah.
But it's also got some strength still.
Yeah.
Obviously it's strong enough to hold these little bubbles that are formed while it's been resting. There's the float test, which is quite a good one. Warm water, and you pinch off a piece of the dough. It should float.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's a good sign that your bulk fermentation's kind of
There's enough
where you
air.
want it to be. Yeah.
Air inside.
At the end of your bulk, how does it smell? If your dough is over fermenting, you will start to smell that acidity coming through. And quite often I'll taste a little bit of dough as well. And you can taste the yeastiness in it when it's fermented. But yeah, I think that's nice.
Okay, so
we've got enough for 4 small loaves in here. We'll cut them at 600 grams rather than the 800 grams we're making for the recipe. So I'm just going to put very little flour on the top there. We've tipped it out onto the table. It's in kind of like an even layer. We haven't folded it over itself. It's not degassed too much. We're going to try and keep quite a lot of that gas in there.
Yeah.
A little bit of flour on top. Not loads, just enough. I'm going to cut straight down and then angle the scraper towards myself and push it. Push it again towards myself and just get that off. And that's already starting to shape it.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking about the shape that I want to get even at that stage. So I've just scraped it off onto the
630.
630. We're not too far off there. 20 grams over is my max.
Okay, so that's good enough.
So there's 1, 2.
620, yeah.
So a little bit of flour on the table, not loads, because we're going to then need it to stick to the table when we're rounding it and sealing it. You can put a little bit of flour on top of your loaves. So with the scraper, I'm going to get it and flip it. So first, we're just going to get a nice round shape.
Yeah, I'm going to pay extra attention here because this is usually where I go wrong with bread.
So we've got a nice round shape, and then basically we're going to create a structure that's going to tighten it up as well as build some height to it. I typically grab 2 sides, stretch it out a little, just over the center line, just over.
And this is to make a round.
To make a round,
Okay.
yeah. This is a really easy way of shaping
Yeah.
round. There are, again, loads of ways of doing it. This is just one that's nice and easy to do at home for a round.
Okay.
So you see how it's kind of like curved up, it's not flattening down. Then I'm going to grab these corners that I've created that in the same location where I picked up before. Little stretch out.
Bring 'em in.
You see we're getting some height going.
Yeah.
Then these 2. So I'm going to pick it up, give it a stretch, over, over.
And because it's so like taut, it's holding it up.
Yeah.
It's not
Yeah,
spreading
exactly. The
out.
dough's got the right amount of strength.
Uh-huh.
We've hydrated it
And that's,
correctly.
That's the gluten.
And we've fermented it well. So I might do one more. So that's basically our round shape. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip it from here over there. And you see now I don't want flour on the bench.
Okay, so you want
Because basically then what I'm going to do is seal all this up. And if there's flour on the bench, it'll just slide around. So pick it up, over. I'm just going to drop it so that the center is on the bottom.
to... Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so now this is our skin side back up. So we can just put a little bit of flour on the top or flour our hands, not too much. So what you don't want at this stage is loads of dough on here. My right hand is going to go around and pull back towards myself, and this is going to hit this edge, and it's going to stick.
And pull it, stretch it underneath.
This hand I'm just going to use to guide, starting from sort of down here, like, 4 o'clock? Bring it around to 12 o'clock, back, and then bring it from 12 to 6 o'clock towards yourself. You see
Okay.
it's tightening up?
Yeah, it's
Yeah?
much more round now.
And my left hand wasn't really putting too much tension, it's just making sure it stays where I want it to stay, keeping it nice and round. And again, round and back, round. Well, I've done that 4 times now. If you do it well, you should do it in 3 or 4 turns. What a lot of people do, the common mistake, is they just do this. They just sort of move it.
Oh, and that doesn't actually pinch
It doesn't
do
actually
anything. Stretch it.
Whereas if I now flip this over, you can see I've basically sealed that off.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to drop it in a little flour. I'm just getting flour on the underside, not the top, because later what we're going to do is just give it a little final stitch
Pick it up,
in and just flip it
flip it
over.
over.
Yeah,
even it out,
nice and gentle. You spent loads of time developing that one.
and then stretch it out.
Stretch it out, not too much. Yeah, perfect.
These.
Yeah. Now, kind of pick it up and place it where you want it to be. Yeah,
And stretch it out.
yeah. So right over, so we're building a bit more tension.
And then just pinch a little bit more.
Yeah, I think a little bit more. We need a bit more tension here. So maybe I would go these 2.
These 2.
Yeah, cool.
Well, this
and
one.
then this one, use this one to flip it over towards yourself.
Okay, so here.
That's it. Yeah. Pick it up and then just drop it so it's centered. There you go.
And
now
then-
you're onto the
okay.
rounding. Yeah. Ah, like he was born to do it. Beautiful. That's really nice. Really, really
Perfect.
nice. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And then
Into the flour. Yeah. Into your basket.
perfect. Oh,
Perfect. Can't even, there's no difference here. But just to give a final extra little bit of tension with a round loaf.
after resting for a few
After
minutes.
resting for like 2-3 minutes. That's
Okay.
all it takes. It's just, literally just kind of,
Because if you don't rest it,
it'll just pull back.
and it might tear as
Yeah.
well.
And just that little bit of extra tension. If it was really slack, I might go as well. Like,
Okay.
do 4 corners. Opposite sides, yeah. One, so this is called a stitch. So we're just kind of, one little stitch at the end. It's not totally necessary, it just gives you, it's
How
like a
you
final
just
little
pinch,
protection.
just pinching it
Just,
down.
just a light press.
Okay.
You can see that it's kind of curved in the basket. Like,
Pulling inwards.
yeah, exactly. It's got enough tension. We prod it, and we can feel that it's kind of pulling back on ourselves.
Yep. It looks good.
So at this stage, you've got different options. You can fully proof at ambient, at room temperature, and then bake it. So you might, depending how active your dough is at this stage, or how warm your house is, or anything like that, you might want to already have your pot in the oven.
Oh, and it'll,
especially in the summer or something like that. If it's a bit colder, or you can put it somewhere cool, you can give it like half an hour, 45 minutes. You know, maybe.
So you don't have to, like, a lot of like sourdough recipes, they do this.
Then put it in the fridge.
Overnight.
Yeah, you don't have to, no.
You
can totally bake ambient. What we'll do is we'll leave these for like 10, 15 minutes, they'll rise slightly, and then we'll pop them in the fridge. A lot of people's fridges, like I mentioned earlier, they hover more around the 5 degrees mark, 5, 6.
Yeah.
People are in and out all the time getting milk.
So it's a bit
the temperature's going to do like that, and then in the summer they'll kind of warm up as well. So you might want to go straight in the fridge.
Okay.
So that you don't overproof by the time you get up the next morning.
Yeah.
So your schedule for your sourdough is going to be like, day 1, feed your leaven. Day 2, mix the dough. Day 3, bake. But
so
actually, all that time, the hands-on time is quite minimal.
It was at this point that the bread we threw into the ovens at the beginning were ready to take out and allowed to cool, but not before checking them out to see how a successful bake looks like.
So that's baked for 35 minutes, I think.
35 minutes? It looks, it's so good.
See, even in those 5 minutes since we took the last one, you can...
That sounds a lot deeper.
Yeah, it's now hollow all the way through, and that crust has that crunch. Number 1. So the only differences between ours really is the scoring. By the time you got around here, I think you got your eye in.
Yeah.
Too shallow, too deep, and then just right.
This is I mean, that's very obviously too shallow there.
Yeah, exactly.
This one probably too shallow as well.
A little bit too shallow, just
not long enough as well.
Yeah.
But that was
just
perfect.
You see with a score like this,
consistent.
you get a nicer round shape. When we're looking at a baked loaf, like the things that I'm kind of looking for, obviously the color, it's not burnt too quickly, which would be a sign that there's too much sugar like left in the dough. It hasn't fermented out, so it caramelizes super quickly and goes black. We've got a nice kind of like ready rust thing going on, which is ideal.
It smells so good.
The other thing to look for is the profile of the loaf. If it was really under fermented, basically it would go straight up and you would get like almost like a ball.
Yeah.
If it was over fermented, obviously the loaf would flatten out and
like
it would kind of go like a perfect semicircle. So
that's
you see how we've got a little ridge here?
Yeah.
You've had enough heat in the oven to get the spring and the dough's nicely fermented. So yeah, I think that's a good kind of shape profile to have.
Nice. Perfect.
Just nice.
So obviously not everyone at home will have an industrial grade oven that has steam injection, so Sam showed us how you can achieve similar results using your oven at home. To do this, you will need one of these things, which is a casserole dish or a Dutch oven. Essentially what this does is trap any steam being released by the dough, creating a humid enough environment to allow the dough to expand without the crust hardening too fast or becoming too thick. We're throwing this into a hot oven to preheat, as you want the pot to be hot when you place your dough inside.
25 minutes, like about half an hour at home is ideal. This oven, it heats up super quickly. I'm gonna preheat it at 240 and then I'll drop it when we... With all of these methods where you're basically introducing steam, I think my worry is that you're not necessarily controlling the amount of steam. So using
Like
a
a
sealed cast iron pot, for me, is the best way to kind of replicate those results every time and get it's the closest thing to baking in one of these. It's kind of mimics that. Yeah. And obviously you don't want to lose too much heat, so you want to be fairly quick. So
I'll just let you do it. You're not going to put any,
you can
paper down or anything?
You can cut a bit of parchment, maybe with some handles, to help you lower it in. I'm
you use
not
enough
coordinated enough to do that successfully.
If it's hot enough, it shouldn't stick, right? And
if it's hot enough, it shouldn't stick. If the fermentation is good, it shouldn't stick.
Okay.
We're putting a bit of flour on the bottom again, just to create an extra layer to stop the bottom burning. So screaming hot pan, nicely proof loaf. I'm going to score it in the pot, which is, it's not ideal, but it works well. So I just kind of gently lowered it in. You just kind of supported it a little bit. You don't just kind of want to go, and then it would just totally degas it. And then again, a simple score is best. Like, don't mess around too much. So maybe we'll just... Do the same again. Once it's in there, you want to be quite quick getting it back in the oven. So I've just lowered the temperature a little bit because this oven is really vicious.
Okay.
But at home, I might, say your oven goes up to 250, stick it in and lower it to like 230, something like that. And we're going to bake it for 20 to 25 minutes covered, take the lid off, and then bake it for a further sort of 10, 15 minutes to get the color. So this has had 20 minutes covered with the lid on, so hopefully it's risen, not colored too much.
Ooh,
you can see that it's still pale. It's got like the volume is really good on that. Super happy with that. Yeah, but it's totally pale at the minute because the steam is preventing it from caramelizing. So it's just steaming away in there. So now we're going to put it back in for another 10 to 15 minutes just to caramelize the crust and get a really good color on it and make sure it's baked all the way through. Oh, this looks good. Cool. Ooh. So there's our finished loaf. Tons of color on it, which is nice.
Much darker, but it still looks just as good as the other ones.
Yeah.
Wow.
So we've got a nice dark color on it, which I personally really like. When you're baking bread, it's the two reactions are the same as when you cook a steak. So it's the Maillard reaction and it's caramelization. So once we've kind of let all that moisture go when we took the lid off, then that's able to happen, and you get these lovely crust colors, which range from dark reds and oranges through to a little bit of black. A little bit of black is nice. So if we take it out, it feels light to the touch, which is a really good sign. We tap it, it's super hollow. Give it a tiny squeeze. Oh yeah.
Yeah, you're getting that in the headphones.
Nice and crusty. I love that. Yeah. I would say that's not burnt, but a lot of people would say that's burnt. Like I would say that's nicely caramelized, but
it's caramelized.
It's not burnt on the bottom. It's going to be really nice inside.
When I cook anything.
Yeah. We definitely get people that don't like it that dark. But yeah, again, nice like profile to the loaf. You see how it's sprung up from the base.
Well, it just shows you can get these results in a basically
so
like
should
a
we get
home
the one from the deck to compare? Yeah, absolutely.
Possible.
There's not so much difference really.
Although I guess it's probably a lot darker just because you said that oven's a bit aggressive.
That oven is really aggressive.
Yeah.
At the end of our time at Heyl Bakery, we sat down with Kay and Sam to ask them a few questions about their journey to becoming bakers and about sourdough and some of the challenges of making completely vegan products, all while enjoying some of the freshly baked sourdough that was ready to cut into.
Baking sourdough, Heyl Bakery, vegan sourdough bakery.
Yes.
How did that come about? How did you start baking?
That's tricky because like we've both got slightly different baking backgrounds. I mean, for me, baking, I've enjoyed like it's something that I came to quite young as a kid. Like I used to help my mum in the kitchen, baking cakes and things, and I quickly quite enjoyed it. Being a way to like show people warmth and friendship and stuff. But then for Sam,
I kind of got into bread baking at uni, like my 21st birthday party in a student house. We like baked 40 pizzas in a tiny crappy oven. It was amazing. I think we were both in jobs that we weren't entirely happy with. I worked for a housing association. Managed commercial property.
And then you were...
So I was, at the time that I got into baking, I was actually working for a think tank. For Sam, he was brave enough to kind of quit his professional job, and he went and trained at the School of Arts and Food for 6 months to get kind of proper technical training and grasp of sourdough. And he went into working for E5, the bakery in London. This is the first time that I've been doing any professional baking. I've been learning on the job, which is probably really naive, but both always talked about wanting to do a food business someday. We always kind of became a bakery the more we got into baking, and then obviously Sam went to do his course. And it was one of those things where it's like one day when we've saved enough money, one day when like we feel the time is right. And then lockdown happened, COVID happened. Like a lot of people, it just kind of made you stop and think about, are you enjoying life? Is this for you? And then my dad died quite suddenly in 2020, so we spent quite a lot of time back home, and again, that was like another point in life where you do start to reflect, like, is like, what are we waiting for, really? And so we started kind of like throwing around ideas about, Sam was literally measuring out the garage to see if a micro bakery would fit in there. And then we just, by complete chance, came across, there's a local organisation called Real Ideas, and they were launching a business support scheme where part of it was an opportunity to take over an old bakery space in a morgue. In a former morgue, yeah, sorry. And so, like, we just applied on the off chance. We put together, like, a very basic business plan, and we put an application in, and we got accepted. And that was the beginning of Heyl Bakery. That was how it all started.
There was that moment, and it was like, I think we're starting a bakery in Plymouth.
Yeah.
I think we're doing it. And there was a previous bakery in there that closed down. So yeah, we were in there for like 18 months.
In that time, we were mostly doing like pop-ups and farmers markets, but we always knew that, you know, once we felt like we'd built up enough, we really wanted to have a retail space of our own, and that's how this happened.
This place,
Yeah.
I mean, this place is so nice.
Yeah.
It's so
It's literally torture sitting with this bread in front
Yeah.
of you. So scale farmers stuff, so good. And we've got some Cornish cake sea salt in there as well, just, you know.
This is baked really nicely in the cast iron. It's got a thin crust. And the fact that it's high moisture, it should keep really well.
Was that something you had to like figure out? Was to just how to make a lot of these things vegan, a lot of the pastry stuff?
When Sam was at the School of Arts and Food, he'd already started developing a sweet bun recipe anyway as part of that. I mean, that was a trial and error project. That was like a labour of real dedication. You know, we use that as a basis for then developing a brioche dough. So it does take a bit of trial and error, but because there are things like this like naturally out there now, it's just so much easier than probably would have been 10 years ago. I think one of the biggest challenges is egg in particular, because it adds so much structure to products and gives you that air as well if you're whipping them. So I've had some real disasters of cakes where I'm like, I can take this recipe and just veganise it, and then it's just like flat. Like, well, that was a disaster.
I've got the easy job because bread like this is vegan anyway.
Yeah.
It's all the sweet stuff that's difficult.
So everything here is 100% sourdough, no yeast.
Yeah.
Was that sort of like a decision that you made early on?
Like fundamentally, it's about flavour and taste. We want to show people that sourdough isn't just one thing. Sourdough can be anything. So you can make a light white tin loaf with sourdough. You can make a chocopan style bread. You can make croissant. You can make cinnamon buns. And it's not all just big crunchy loaves with a huge sour taste. I happen to love that, and we make a lot of those. But you know, sourdough is really a versatile way of leavening. The products keep for longer. They, you know, they're nutritious. It's all long fermentation, so it's breaking down the gluten and the natural sugars in dough. So it's kind of, you know, brings the GI down. We have people come to us and say, I can eat your sourdough bread, but I can't eat the sourdough bread from the supermarkets.
Yeah.
And often that's because it's not really sourdough. They've just added sourdough flavourings, and then if you look at the ingredients, there's still a load of additives on top of that, or additional gluten that's been added that's not as good for the gut. So yeah, we use lower proteins, dough ground flours, long fermentation, high moisture breads that keep really well.
So you could count on one hand how many things you put in this.
Well, fundamentally, it's flour, water, salt.
Right. So 3 things.
And that extra level of flavour it gives as well is really beneficial on the sweet side of things, because you get used to how much kind of butter and egg adds flavour to a product, and then, you know, you can go and have a vegan version that's just like yeasted, and it's so bland. Like, we've had some really boring, like from even some really good bakeries, and they, you know, they've got yeasted products for the sweet side of things, and you have the vegan bun, and it's just like, there's nothing here, it's just sugar and air. The sourdough fermentation just has that extra level, like with that with the stone ground flours, you just have a bit more going on there. So
Nice.
Cool.
Perfect. Sounds good.
Keep munching on the bread.
That was
I didn't think I was going to know the bread.
Challenge is going to be